Matt DeBerry's going to make the case that Kirby Smart has ruined something. Thanks a lot, Matt. Oh, thanks a lot, Kirby.
Yeah. Well, I think Mark Richt got it started. He really coached against the Tigers really well. Dean, these last 20 years, going back to probably 2002, Georgia's taken control of the series that was probably the tightest back and forth for 100 years. This is one of the closest rivalries in all of college football until the 2000s started. And Georgia's really had their way with Auburn recently. This would be 7 in a row if they win this game. They beat Auburn every single year since 2013. And they're running away with this rivalry, and it doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon. Now, this was a thing where the series was, Georgia was ahead, then it was tied, then Auburn was ahead, then it was tied again. Georgia's running away with the series record, and I don't think Auburn is ever going to tie this ever again. And it certainly seems like Georgia's taken this rivalry and just taken off with it. And Auburn fans are realizing it. Georgia fans are used to it by now. And some of these games just aren't even close either, Dean. It's not like Georgia's barely squeaking by year after year against Auburn. They're putting a beating on them. We saw it last year. I think the line this year is 15.5. I don't know if this rivalry feels like it once did, when I was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. But there have still been some big games, big moments that people will remember forever. But it seems like, at least over the last 5-6 years, it just hasn't felt like one of the biggest rivalries in college football.
Well, it certainly is a big rivalry. I know exactly what you're putting your finger on, and I think you're. So I try to talk about this in Final Feelings over on Dog Post, which is something we write every Thursday for our subscribers. If you're not a subscriber, you should certainly be so, because that's where we spill out all of our insight and so forth. You get what we're hearing, you get Matt's insider takes and recruiting reports. And it's not like it was in the 90s for sure. And then, so there's a lot to, I talk about this in Final Feelings too. There's a lot to remember about Auburn's, so much of Auburn is that they play Alabama. Now, I'm sorry to be that way about it, but they essentially are anti-Alabama. That much of their ethos is that they're not Alabama. They're like Georgia Tech in that way. I wouldn't necessarily classify Clemson like that. Like, we're not South Carolina, but they're a lot like Auburn, but they just don't have Alabama lurking around. For so long, this rivalry really was sort of brother against brother, for lack of a better term. There's a lot of recruiting against one another in Middle Georgia, heart of Georgia, Atlanta. Not as much in Alabama, but it's definitely changed. And I'll tell you the moment it changed. I'm going to go to the screen here. It was not Michael Johnson. It was actually this game right here. And this is Mark Richt celebrating after the 2006 game win over Auburn. Now, it rained that day. This photo is a little bit soft, what we call soft. But Matthew Stafford and company were completely ready that day. They had just gotten throttled by Kentucky. Throttled is the wrong word. They had just lost to Kentucky, and they had to go down to Auburn and play. They were playing the number 5 team in the country, and they had no business winning that game. And as it turns out, Mike Bobo, Mark Richt, and company scheduled it up. They said, we're only going to do what we can do well. This is a shot from the AJC, Brant Sanderlin, actually. And they came down and hit a big ball. And from that point forward, from this sort of moment walking off on, Matt, Auburn has won 3 games against Georgia. They've only ended the season without a loss to Georgia twice. And that day, Mark said to us post-game, he said, he showed us the game plan. He held it up. He was like, he essentially said, I didn't think this would work. But it did, and it did in a very big way. And Georgia, that is a jumping off point for them. Now, these things can change, but it doesn't feel like they're going to change. I mean, Auburn played for a national championship and won the SEC in 2010 and won the national championship. Same thing in 2013. And the following years, they were absolutely throttled by Georgia in Athens in 11 and in 14. Auburn with their biggest win over Georgia, maybe in history. It's a good question. Maybe 83 was probably a bigger win for them, but in 17, just the way they beat Georgia that day. But then a couple of weeks later, they got smashed by Georgia in Atlanta.
Yeah. Yeah, I was at that 2006 game, the Trey Battle game, and I remember it raining, and a lot of people left at the half. I mean, that felt like the game was over at halftime. Those people could not believe what was going on.
I could not believe
that was supposed to be. I couldn't either. It was great. I think Georgia lost to Vanderbilt earlier in the season too that year. I mean, it's unranked, and they put it on Will Muschamp, who was the DC at Auburn at that time. Crazy game, but if you really think about it, I think Auburn won on the last play right in 2001. 2005, they had the crazy long pass to Ben, I think, Aromashadu or Ben Obama, one of the two. And then the Hail Mary, prayer of Jordan Hare in 13. I mean, so those are three games that very easily could have gone Georgia's way. And you look at, the series in the last 20 years, and it's already, well in Georgia's favor. And then, you give those three to Auburn. If Georgia finds a way to win those three games, it's even worse, right? So, but this game means so much to a lot of people, especially to the Auburn players from Georgia, because most of them didn't get recruited by Georgia. Now Auburn, goes into a guy like Derek Brown, who Georgia wanted, and there's a case here and there, but a lot of these kids, didn't grow up Georgia fans. Georgia didn't recruit them. They go to Auburn and they want to beat Georgia, and it's a big deal, that fan base. They want a coach who can beat Georgia again, and not just once every 5 years, but, I don't want to say routinely ever, because I don't see that happening anytime soon. But it's really just doesn't seem competitive right now, and I don't know when this thing is going to turn back the other way. I mean, Hugh Freeze better be the guy for them, or else they're just going to keep losing to Georgia year after year after year. They need 5 stars. They need depth. They need talent all across the board if they're going to beat the Dogs anytime soon.
Our friends at Eco Poly are located in the heart of Georgia, where all of these recruiting battles have taken place through the years. You're looking at their rocker chair that I use consistently. And by the way, you can get 15% off of any order, as well as free shipping. So take advantage of that while you can. This is Eco Poly has been a great partner. They got a lot of stuff that you're going to be interested in. Matt's going to use it here in the near future, probably more in December and January though. We got to space it out with Matt. I think with Kirby, although with Mark Richt, it was pretty decisive, Matt. With Kirby, it's gotten even more so. I mean, that win in 16 over a top 10 Auburn team that had one loss. Then a year later, winning the SEC championship game. In 18, Georgia just kind of grinded their way to that win. 19 was, 21-19. That was a tough fight. I mean, Georgia got up 21-0. Is that right? And then
Auburn, I think, scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth, and we're kind of driving. They had the ball back. I think that was Bo Nix's sophomore year.
Freshman.
Maybe his freshman year. And that's I got that great photo of, I think, Kirby chest bump, maybe Trayvon Walker or someone, and he's falling down, and there's like 5 different first-round picks in that picture. But that was a big win. Brian Harrion trucked some poor photographer in the game. That was a wild one. But, again, they got off to a 21 point lead. And I say the game was over. It felt over, but Auburn did have a nice little comeback there. 2020 was a blowout.
Georgia did not have an offense at that point in the season. It just didn't exist. They were having to earn every yard, and they had the defense had to hold on.
They were a top 10 team in 2020, I believe, when they went to Athens and Georgia won that game.
That was a top 10 matchup, and Auburn could not score a touchdown.
Yeah, and then we remember what happened last year, the big throw to Ladd, or 2 years ago, the big throw to Ladd McConkey that I think you got a great shot of, the interception early by Nakobe Dean that kind of changed the game a little bit, even though it was, I think, early in the second quarter or whatever. But it's a fun environment, and those people, they are very passionate. They love the Tigers. They love college football. They live and breathe Auburn football. They are desperate for a winner, and they're desperate for a win over Georgia. I just don't think it's going to happen this weekend.
Yeah, I'm not sure I think it's going to happen this week. It was never going to really happen with Brian Harsin. I mean, Brian Harsin's teams, they nearly took out Alabama in 21, came, one play from doing it in 21. but that was never a love connection with Hugh Freeze and Auburn, the Auburn family, if you want to call it that. They think they wanted Lane Kiffin, but they've got Hugh Freeze, who certainly knows how to, call plays and score points. He does not have that right now. He's going to need a quarterback or a few. He's going to need. They're just. I think what I would worry about if I were Auburn is that, there's no state of Auburn. There's no, people. I wonder if people around the country know where Auburn is. I think they associate it with Alabama because of Auburn, Alabama. But that really is, to me, the greatest rivalry in college football is Auburn, Alabama. I mean, it's just, it is insane. But I would be concerned if I were the president of Auburn University that we're being left behind a little bit. Now Texas and Oklahoma are coming into the league. Auburn's heyday, Matt. They've won 8 SEC championships. 4 of them came in a 6-year period in the 80s when Pat Dye was there. Bo Jackson was there for some of that time. There's been plenty of speculation about Auburn really throwing the money out at that time. They might have to really throw the money out to get this thing going in the right direction for NIL and just make Auburn a destination again. I mean, there was plenty of accusations about Cam Newton in 2010. So and I don't say this in a judgy way. I mean, I don't know what happens at Georgia. I have no idea in terms of what they did or did not do to get Herschel Walker. But Auburn, when they've had success, has always been accused of paying players. Well, now that's completely not an issue. You just go do it. So can this Auburn program turn things around with cash? That's the question. Because, I mean, if everybody's turning it around with cash, that makes it a very competitive marketplace.
They have to. It's one of the toughest jobs in the country. They have one of the toughest schedules in the country. You got to do something. And if you can incentivize these 5 stars, which you need if you want to beat Georgia and Alabama and LSU, and I mean, that's what A&M's doing. They're not turning it into wins, but Auburn has enough resources. They have enough passionate fans and people who want to win badly to get this turned around. And I think they could get it turned around quicker than maybe South Carolina could. I think Auburn's a better all-time program. They've got more resources. But those are 2 of the toughest jobs, I think, in the country. But Auburn's got it tough. They got to do something. And I don't think this is a ship that can turn around quickly. I think it's a slow move this big ship around to go back the other way. But when you're playing, these big-time programs, it feels like every week. And again, you have to beat, Arkansas consistently and Ole Miss and Mississippi State. I mean, Auburn, you automatically check those as wins. But it's hard to do that every year. But it's a tough schedule, and they're going to have to use money some way, somehow, whether it's NIL or just whatever, to get the players good enough to beat these teams consistently.
But, the quote is, it seems like Kirby has ruined this game. I think part of what's going on only now in the last 10 years is that Georgia's reaching close to the potential that it should be at, and that for years it wasn't. And we're seeing the natural end to that discussion. For Auburn, so Auburn and Clemson do really have a lot in common in terms of the fan base and the ag background, to some degree the military background. And it's a particular type of school. It's not, neither of them are that far from Atlanta. Neither of them are the flagship school of their places. Auburn has just got a vastly more challenging path to winning than Clemson does because of the league they play, and A, but B, really, they're rival. And I go back to, Clemson is certainly a cult. I would say Auburn is very close to that, if not a cult as well. Am I wrong in that?
I would put Auburn in cult category. Yeah, they're a top 5 cults, I would say, in college
top 5
football.
cult, which would be Clemson, Auburn, A&M. What are the other couple?
Alabama is kind of culty a little bit.
Tennessee, I didn't expect that.
Culty a little. Yeah, I would put them in cult category. I don't know the Big Ten fan bases well enough to put that in there. But
Yeah, but you've got some culty teams in this league for
yeah,
sure. And Auburn's given them the blueprint. I mean, Auburn, so much of their identity honestly has been, well, we're not Alabama. Let's just be clear, we're not Alabama. And they don't like, I mean, they get their faces rubbed in the dirt more than probably anybody in the league because they are, I would imagine that the state of Alabama is probably 85%, 80% Alabama folks and 10 to 15% Auburn. That might be, I don't know if that's a little high for Alabama or not. I just know that when Georgia and Bama are playing and CBS is covering the game, it is not abnormal to see folks who are covering the game for CBS at Auburn to have Alabama gear on, hats, shirts,
yeah.
in their stadium.
It's funny because I was a kid in the mid-'90s living just south of Birmingham in a small town in Calera, and I remember the little church we went to, like the whole community went to that one church, the whole town did. And I felt like there were more Auburn families. I had, friends who were Auburn people than Alabama, and that's when Auburn was beating Alabama somewhat consistently there. I mean, they were the better program when I lived in Alabama, and of course that all changed when Nick Saban came to town, but it really is crazy how that entire state kind of revolves around this game. My parents were the only Georgia people in the entire town. Obviously, we were from Georgia. My dad went to Georgia, but we were the Georgia family stuck in between just Auburn and Alabama madness. So it is just, there's a different level of it over there, and they care, they're passionate, and Auburn fans, they need a win over Georgia soon, or else those folks might be jumping off a bridge I don't think there are many bridges over there in Alabama. There are a lot of train tracks, but they need to win over Georgia soon, I think.
Well, why though? I mean, like I look, I think Kirby knows maybe this game better than any game because of being in Alabama for almost a decade, playing this game. Georgia, Florida, I think is to some degree self-explanatory. It's your biggest rival. Auburn, Georgia is you get these games in the SEC and I think the Big Ten. I'm not sure you get these elsewhere. Like, well, a little bit like Clemson, Florida State, I guess, but even that's not. It's not like this, right? I mean, this game's been played 120. This is the 128th game, Matt, and they are bitter. Let me just say this: they are bitter rivals, but there's a lot of. I'm not sure it's as visceral as Georgia, Florida, or I know it's not as bad as Bama, Auburn.
It's not peak college football, but man, normally this game is played in November. Everyone's kind of bundled up a little bit. The colors, I think, mesh really well together on the field, the red and black, the orange and blue. Same type of people. They right. Just, some live on either side of this imaginary state line. But it's a fun game, especially when it's at night. It just feels a little different. It's an electric atmosphere no matter where you play it. But again, it's not peak college football, but it's up there. I mean, this is a fun game. I think nationally people tune into this game, especially when it is a top 10 matchup or top 25 matchup. And seasons are on the line. Seasons aren't on the line right now, but this is a game that should be in November where you really need to win and get that conference win a couple of weeks before that SEC championship game. Just doesn't seem like the stakes are there when it's played in September. This game should never be played in September. And that's criminal. But here we are.
So you put your finger right on it, because if there's a school, well, I think Florida's a lot like Georgia as a school, like the universities and so forth. But there's no other, fan base that's similar to Georgia than Auburn. I think they're very similar. There's a lot of Auburn people in Atlanta, and it's just sort of spread out through Georgia. But what's happened is you've seen so many things decided late in the year. Why is Georgia Auburn in 2002 such a big deal game? Because it had huge stakes. If that game were the Carolina game at the beginning of the season, So what I do wonder about the future of this game is. So Auburn was so eager to get this game away from the end of the season, which, I get it from their perspective. But Georgia now, at the league, when they did this, they did not know they were going to have Texas and Oklahoma come into the league. I do wonder if we're going to see a return to, I kind of doubt it, but I do wonder if we're going to see a return to the end of Georgia's schedule be the Gators, Auburn, and Tech, because the end of the seasons are so crowded with games. But Georgia's not going to play Tennessee every year. That's going away. And so that sort of stopgap, that's gone. Georgia Auburn's playing every year from here on out. You don't think so? Well, then why are they playing this? Why did they play in 2013? Why are they playing in 2024? They're doing all this so they can settle it out and figure it out. And I think that the fact, Matt, too, that this is a top of yearly games, that this is a top 10-ish game of television audiences tells you all you need to know. But you're right, man. This game used to decide SEC championships and to some degree decide divisions. That's gone now. This game is not deciding anything, but it still is a huge. You can have a rivalry in September. It just doesn't mean the same. That's all.
Yeah, I'm with you. Florida Tennessee is early in the year, and that's always a big one. But Georgia Auburn, it's just. This is a hoodie game. You got your sweater on. It's a little chilly, especially these 3:30 games that dip into the night. It gets colder and colder, and the excitement is still in the air, though. It's a fun game, and they should be playing forever. And it's a fun rivalry, and I think it's gone back to the brother on brother type of deal. But right now there's a clear older brother and a younger brother who's just itching to get there. But
the younger brother better recruit a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't feel the hatred as much as I did maybe in 2013 and, through 2014 and, around that period of time. Well, 2010.
I'll say this about that. I did ask about that at the time because it always did seem like this was sort of a civil rivalry. But when Aaron Murray's chin was reconstructed by Nick Fairley, and Aaron will show you the scars, and I have some crazy pictures of that, of blood on Aaron's jersey. They switched it, but not before I got some images of it. That made it a really dirty rivalry for a little bit of time, but it does, to me. I agree with you. I think that's sort of settled down some again. But if Auburn wins a couple games, and we'll just see where it goes. It's Georgia Florida dirty though. I don't necessarily think it's a it's just kind of, how would you describe it? These are different rivalries. Am I wrong?
I think there's more hate in Georgia, Florida. Yes. I wouldn't necessarily call it dirty, but there's still plenty of hate there, especially with those Richt and Urban Meyer years, I guess, 2007, 2008. You could definitely feel it then. And then overtime in 2010, I believe, Grantham telling the Florida kicker to choke. Was that 13? Maybe that was 10. I don't remember. But there was definitely some hatred there. And there's some still here, but Georgia fans are not going to take it well the next time Auburn beats Georgia. I don't think it's going to be this week, or don't think it's going to be next year, but eventually Auburn will knock off the Dogs, and it's going to be a real sad day in Athens then, because they're just used to beating Auburn now. That's how it is.
Yeah, you don't beat everybody forever. And we both expect Georgia to win this weekend. We'll just see. They got to go do it. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the website.